Hi everyone, this is a short video on the system of Ashtanga Yoga from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So here I'll just give really a brief introduction to the idea of the Ashtanga system of practice from the Yoga Sutras, and hoping to make several more videos on this subject where we can take the different parts of Ashtanga Yoga and just talk about them each in a little bit more depth. So just to start, what's the Yoga Sutras? So for those who don't know, the Yoga Sutras is really a collection of yoga philosophy and practice that was compiled and codified by the author Patanjali. Now, Patanjali was one of the great teachers of yoga. When he compiled the Yoga Sutras and when he lived, historians are still not completely in agreement and completely clear about that, but he lived quite some time ago, and at that time he took the practices and philosophy of yoga which were being taught in many different places and in different ways, and compiled them together and codified them into one text called the Yoga Sutras. Okay, so Ashtanga Yoga originally comes from the Yoga Sutras, and it's an integrated system of practice focusing on meditation practice and deepening the meditation practice. So now in the Yoga Sutras you have 4 chapters, and you'll find Ashtanga Yoga in the 2nd chapter. So just a brief outline of the Yoga Sutras. It starts with, the first chapter is on the subject of samadhi, right? The deepest state of meditation. And that chapter is really written for meditators and practitioners who are either going through the different states of samadhi in their own practice, in their own meditation, or are very close to samadhi and are looking for guidance and practices and ways of stabilizing the mind field in order to deepen their meditation. Right. Now, the 2nd chapter, which is called Sadhana Padya, is a chapter that's written for practitioners who are not yet at a state of deep meditation or samadhi, but are attempting to go towards that experience. And so Sadhanapada, the 2nd chapter, is written for people who are practicing towards samadhi. And it's in that chapter that Ashtanga Yoga is given as a system to progress towards samadhi. Right. Now in Sadhanapada, in the 2nd chapter, you've actually got 2 different systems of practice that Patanjali outlines. Now the first one isn't Ashtanga Yoga, the first one is what's called Kriya Yoga. And now Kriya Yoga is given, it's described as being given for people who have some natural tendency or momentum in meditation and in spiritual practice. Right? So Kriya Yoga is for those who have, you can say, less obstacles on their path of meditation and their path towards samadhi. And then Ashtanga Yoga is given for those people who have perhaps a few more obstacles to overcome in their path of meditation. Now, one of the interesting things about these 2 systems is that all of the practices given in Kriya Yoga for the people who have more momentum and less obstacles on their path of meditation, all of the practices in that system are also part of the Ashtanga Yoga system. So if you're taking the path of practice that is Ashtanga Yoga, you're also really taking on all of the practices of Kriya Yoga as well. So in a sense, the Ashtanga Yoga system is the practices of Kriya Yoga together with a lot of other instruments, a lot of other tools which are there to help you to overcome your obstacles in your meditation and in your spiritual practice. So therefore, I find that I like Ashtanga Yoga very much as a path of meditation because it offers really a lot of tools to be used to overcome different obstacles. Okay. So then, what does the name Ashtanga mean? It's a Sanskrit word. It means, roughly translated, the 8 limbs. Ashta Anga, 8 limbs. Limbs like the limbs of a person's body or the limbs of a tree. So 8 limbs. And here we have the 8 steps or 8 parts. It's not necessarily a progression, although it can be seen from one perspective as a progression, from first step to final step. It's also, in a sense, something like a wheel with many spokes, or a body with many limbs, or a tree with many limbs, just different parts of what's essentially the same process or the same practice. Right? So now, it begins with the first 2 limbs, Yama and Niyama. Now, Yama, the word Yama in Sanskrit can be translated in a number of different ways, but one of the common translations is to restrain. Right? Like you perhaps restrain a wild horse when it wants to bolt off. So Yama means, in that sense, to restrain. So that gives a kind of significance to the understanding of Yama as a practice. Yama is the ways in which a human being, a practitioner, can restrain their energies, restrain their capacities, ways that we have of possibly acting in the world, ways of restraining those which will help us in our ultimate journey of meditation. Right? So these are also sometimes considered to be sort of the basic ethics of the Ashtanga system. So that's Yama first, the restraints. So there are 5 of these, 5 Yamas and then 5 Niyamas. And these are not, one of the interesting things about Yamas is that they're not really, in a sense, commandments. They're not really specific things to do or specific things to not do. They're rather abstract principles, abstract ideals to attempt to manifest in one's personality, right? And so in that way, they are very much open to interpretation, which of course can be a negative, but for a practitioner, it's very much a positive, I feel, because life life demands us to be flexible. Life demands us to address each and every situation and each and every moment as it arrives. And so when you have the Yamas as a part of your life, then in every moment you can adjust using your awareness and find out what is the right way in this moment to apply those abstract principles. What is the right way to manifest those ideals in myself and in my life, right? So in that sense, they're very useful because they're very flexible and you can use them very skillfully. So I'll just list the 5 Yamas, the 5 basic ideals. So first one is Ahimsa. Ahimsa simply can be translated as non-violence. Non-violence to oneself, non-violence to all beings. And ahimsa is really the basic ethical principle that all of the others are built on. One of the important ideas of the Yamas is that the earlier ones are the foundation for the later ones. So whatever comes earlier, so for example, ahimsa, the first one, that's a foundation for all of the other principles. And so all of the other principles need to be rooted, need to be supported by ahimsa, non-violence. So second one is satya, truth, the attempt to manifest truth in one's actions, in one's personality, through action, through speech, and through mind and thought as well. And truth, of course, being rooted, being built upon non-violence. So one of the things that my Master Swami Veda used to tell people quite often was that if you say something in such a way that someone is hurt by your way of speaking, even if you feel that you've told the truth, then it wasn't really satya. You somehow missed the point of satya. So rather than saying something very aggressively, very angrily, and then, well, I just told the truth, too bad for him if he took offense. So non-violence as being the basis of truth, ahimsa being the basis of satya. So trying to find the way in which to manifest truth as well as non-violence both together. And that's where the skill of the practitioner really comes in, and the flexibility of these ideals starts to become important. How to not compromise one, not compromise truth for the sake of ahimsa, but how to really get both just right at the same time. Right, so something to be very skillful in. So you have ahimsa, satya. Then asteya, roughly translated, means not stealing, but can also mean just not taking what doesn't belong to you. So you can take that pretty far in your contemplation. Asteya. Then brahmacharya. Brahmacharya, literally translated, means walking in Brahman, or otherwise walking and living in divine consciousness, in the presence of the ultimate reality. So pretty high standard to live up to. But brahmacharya also is translated in another very common way, which is also very significant and important translation, which is control of the sexual energy, control of the sexual urge. Right, so control of that particular energy that manifests in our personality. Now that control doesn't necessarily mean complete celibacy, but rather it means the ethical, the right use of that energy that we have. Right, so it's the fourth one. Fifth one is aparigraha. Aparigraha often is translated as non-grasping, so sometimes understood as non-possessiveness, non-grasping and holding on to the objects of the world, which is absolutely correct. All of these have sort of different dimensions of meaning, and I'd like to do a longer video on yamas just by themselves, because it's something you can contemplate so much and go into such a deep discussion with just one. But anyway, aparigraha doesn't mean non-grasping. It also means the tendency of the mind as your meditation progresses to, rather than going out through the senses into the world and attempting to find satisfaction in the world through the senses, your mind sort of grasping out into the world, looking for satisfaction through the senses, rather the tendency that naturally develops in the mind of a meditator where the awareness is directed inwards, and that satisfaction and that fullness is experienced more and more within, and therefore the mind not feeling the need to grasp out through the senses. So aparigraha, non-grasping. Those are the 5 yamas, the 5 yamas of the Ashtanga system of practice. So these are really given, in my understanding, in my limited understanding, these are given really as ways to cultivate a mind which is joyful, which is not conflicted, which is balanced, and which is clear, so that the meditation practice, the later parts of the Ashtanga system, really become easy and natural. So the obstacles that are there in the minefield start to become less and less through the practice of yamas, first of all. And also they're a kind of ethical mode of being which also arises spontaneously in the personality of somebody who's making progress in meditation. So there's something to do as a practice, there's something to do with a kind of effort, but there's also something to notice happening in your personality spontaneously, naturally, as your meditation progress slowly develops over time. So that's yamas. Then we have niyamas, which means, roughly translated, observances. So not so much restraints, ways to restrain your different capacities that you have, but things that you can specifically do, ways that you can specifically direct your mind and direct your energy. Right. So I'll just list these 5 very briefly as well. It's just a quick introduction for the moment. So 5 niyamas. Saucha, generally translated as purity, or sometimes cleanliness. So purity of your physical body. That can be achieved in a lot of different ways, right? Through living a healthy lifestyle, through the kind of food you take, through exercise, etc. And also purity of your surroundings, so taking care of your surroundings. Purity in your relationships, purity in your speech, purity in your mind. It goes very deep. So saucha, purity. Then santosha. Santosha, roughly translated, means contentment, right? Non-hankering for, not so much non-desiring, but the desires slowly becoming less, and non-craving the objects of the senses, right? Being content. Santosha. Then tapas. Tapas is another one that you can talk about for a long time. One of the rough translations of the word tapas literally means heat, the heat of a fire. And that kind of gives you a sense of what tapas means in the system of Ashtanga Yoga in the Niyamas. Tapas can be understood as making a kind of effort, making a kind of struggle which has a kind of quality of fire and of heat about it. Right? Now, there are a lot of different ways of practicing tapas, loads of different ways. In fact, it would be wonderful to do a whole video series just on different ways of practicing tapas. Some traditional ways are tapas of the body. So one important thing to say about tapas. Tapas specifically is not anything that causes harm. So it again is linked back to ahimsa. Everything is rooted in ahimsa. So if in practicing tapas you're causing yourself harm, physically, psychologically, whatever it is, it's not real tapas, it's not a proper practice. Right? So some of the traditional practices of tapas are physical yoga practice, right? Meeting your unconscious discomforts, tensions, and fears which are manifested in your body, meeting them willingly by putting yourself gently, gradually, slowly through these different postures, slowly, gradually increasing the time and going through your tensions, going through your weaknesses, going through those areas of unconsciousness in your body, and thereby freeing your mind bit by bit of many of those obstacles in your meditation. Right? It's one kind of tapas, physical yoga practice, or physical practice of any kind that is leading you into a state of meditation, aiding your meditation practice. Another kind of tapas is simply the practice of silence. Right? So silencing your senses, silencing your speech, attempting to silence your mind in meditation. So many practices of tapas are there. I'll make some other videos about tapas. So far in Niyamas we have Saucha, Santosha, Tapas, then Svadhyaya. Svadhyaya, roughly translated, is self-study. Self-study. So what does that mean? It can mean a number of things. It can mean studying the scriptures, which to my small understanding are essentially, at least the yoga scriptures, are essentially somehow like the scientific lab books of the yogis, right? The yogis in their meditation experiences, in their experiences of moving through different levels of consciousness, different levels of samadhi and different experiences, writing down what their experience was, what method they had used to arrive at that experience, in what way they had used it, and describing the experience, and then mapping out often different experiences and different pathways of practice. So that's one, just reading those things and making those mental impressions is one kind of svadhyaya, self-study, right? Another kind of svadhyaya is simply mantra japa, simply the repetition of one's personal mantra or special mantra, or just the repetition of the name of divinity, the name of divinity that is that resonates most in the mind of the practitioner, in the individual mind. Another kind of svadhyaya, self-study. Another kind is simply just self-awareness, introspection. So svadhyaya, again, can go very deep. And finally, Ishvara Pranidhana. So Ishvara Pranidhana, roughly translated again, Ishvara, word in the Yoga Sutras, roughly meaning personal God, divinity. Pranidhana, placing in the proximity of. So in a sense, placing one's mind in the proximity of divinity. Placing one's mind in the proximity of divine consciousness. Ishvara Pranidhana. It's also translated as surrender to the grace of God, or surrender to divinity, which has many levels of significance, but often referred to as a kind of surrender of one's, the results of one's practice, the results of one's personal meditation, personal tapas, personal spiritual practice, surrendering the results, the fruits of that endeavor to divinity, is also a significance of Ishvara Pranidhana. So that's the 5 Niyamas. So 5 Yamas is the first of the 8 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga, then 5 Niyamas, the second limb of the 8 limbs. So then with that background, actually in a sense, that is the majority of the system of Ashtanga Yoga. And in fact, it's quite interesting when you read Ashtanga Yoga in the Yoga Sutras, because Patanjali was not a fellow to waste words, you can say that. He compiled and codified all of the knowledge of yoga, theory and practice, into a very, very, very concise, very small, when you think about it, the level of knowledge that's there, very small text of the Yoga Sutras. So he wasn't a fellow to waste words, yet in Ashtanga Yoga system, the number of sutras, the number of lines given to Yamas and Niyamas is really a lot, whereas the rest of the system is comparatively little. So the first 2 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga are given really a lot of space in the Yoga Sutras and a lot of, therefore, significance. So then after Yamas and Niyamas, you have Asana. Now Asana, nowadays and in many yoga circles, Asana means all of the yoga postures, which is absolutely correct. But in the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali doesn't actually refer to any specific yoga posture. He doesn't tell you, do Shirshasana, do Padmasana, none of this. Really, he just gives a basic abstract principle of what an asana is. And that is really for the purpose of meditation. And so he says, Sthira Sukham Asana, probably the most famous sutra on asana, which is an asana. The definition of an asana is that which is stable, sthira, and comfortable, sukham. So when at least the body is stable and comfortable here, you can think about what that means. But stable and comfortable here, I would offer the idea that stable and comfortable means the possibility to be still. The possibility to be still for perhaps any amount of time. And if you think about in day-to-day life of most people, when are we really stable and comfortable? When can we really be still without feeling any discomfort? In fact, without feeling any kind of distraction from our body at all, for any amount of time. Most people probably would not find too many situations in life where that happens. Right? Even in deep sleep, deep dreamless sleep, we are only still for a relatively short period of time, and then in between we're always shifting and always moving. So the possibility to be really still, absolutely still without moving and feeling absolutely undisturbed in that stillness. No desire to move, no discomfort, no need to move, and no sense of disturbance in signals of pain or in signals of restlessness from the body. That's Sthira Sukham. That's an asana. And that's what you can work towards in your practice of all the yoga asanas. But then very specifically, that's what you're working towards in your practice of your meditation posture, your meditation asana, in the practice of meditation. That's Sthira Sukham. So then Patanjali gives more advice about how to achieve that, but we'll leave that for the moment. It's trying to be a short video here. So you have Yama, Niyama, then Asana. Right, third step. After Asana, Pranayama. Pranayama, huge topic. So just very brief introduction here. The word Pranayama, what does it mean? What's a rough translation from Sanskrit? Well, there are, again, as always, a lot of possible different translations. One of them, Pranayama, can mean restraint of the energy. So prana, the basic energy, the life energy which is connected to the breath, restraint of that energy or control of that energy is one of the legitimate translations of pranayama, but also pranayama. Ayama in a sense of the expansion. So pranayama can also be understood as the expansion of the prana, of the life energy. Right? So pranayama also means those practices related to the breath. So feeling the breath flow, just simple breath awareness, and the natural diaphragmatic flow of the breath is the first step, essential foundation of pranayama. Right? And then breath awareness and utilizing that flow of the breath and the awareness of the flow of the breath to direct the mind, to lead the mind towards meditation. Right? So, fourth limb pranayama. So next we have Pratyahara. Pratyahara can be roughly translated as the turning in of the senses, or rather, possibly a more skillful translation, the turning in, the drawing in of the mind away from the senses. So Pratyahara is a very specific experience, a specific experience which is the experience of the mind's awareness turning inwards, away from the senses, and therefore, in a sense, disconnecting from the senses which cause the mind to flow outwards, and thereby flowing inwards. Now, when that happens, that disconnection from the senses means that the mind is no longer involved with the senses, and so the senses are, in a sense, in hibernation, no longer operative, no longer functioning and active at that time. So some of the signs of Pratyahara are, for a meditator, when in a certain depth of meditation, regardless of whatever noise is around, not being aware of that noise at all. The mind not even cognizing those sounds, because the mind is, for that period of time, really disconnected from the ear, disconnected from the sense of hearing. Right? So that's an experience of Pratyahara. Now, often when people ask me about Pratyahara, I like to describe it as an experience that I think everyone has every day. When we go to sleep, we go through different stages of sleep. There comes a stage in sleep where your mind snaps inward, away from the senses. And if someone is speaking, or if there's a noise in the room, in that certain experience of going to a depth of sleep, you won't hear that. You won't be aware of whatever noises are around you. Right? So that's an experience of Pratyahara. Unfortunately, most people have already lost consciousness by then. So it's not really a conscious experience, but we know that it happens. We know that when we're deeply asleep, if somebody's talking in the room, we probably don't hear them unless they wake us up. If we wake up, we come out of sleep, our mind comes out of Pratyahara, but that's an experience really that everyone has every day. So if you can remain aware in that process, then you'll be able to experience what it's like to be in that state of Pratyahara, which is really interesting. Okay, so that's a Pratyahara, fifth limb. Then we go into what is sometimes termed Raja Yoga, the section of Ashtanga Yoga, which is then the real process of the mind towards samadhi. Right? Sometimes that's termed as Raja Yoga. Sometimes the preliminary, the first 4 or first 5 steps are considered to be Hatha Yoga, what's termed as Hatha Yoga. So these last 3, sometimes they're called Raja Yoga, so you can call them Raja Yoga if you like. So 6th step, Dharana. Dharana, roughly translated concentration, although that can be a loaded term sometimes. Concentration doesn't mean straining or making an effort or struggling. Concentration really means the mind getting so absorbed in a particular experience that it will focus on that experience to the exclusion of all other experiences. Right? So if you think about that, concentration doesn't necessarily mean doing something through an effort. Concentration simply means your mind enjoying something so much that all other experiences are left behind, and just that pure experience of enjoyment is the single focus of your entire mind and your entire awareness. So that's dharana. That's the significance of the word dharana. Right? The mind flowing on a single cognition, on a single point. And dharana leads to the next step, which is dhyana, generally translated as meditation. So dharana, that absorption of the mind and single-pointed flow of the mind, if it's allowed to continue uninterrupted for a certain period of time, it will spontaneously result in the experience of what's called dhyana, or meditation, a certain state of mind. Right? So dhyana is the 7th limb of Ashtanga Yoga, 8th and final limb, samadhi. Right? So that process of dharana, that process of one-pointed flow of the mind, uninterrupted and undistracted, singular flow of the mind, if left for a certain period of time, will naturally transform itself, naturally result in the experience called dhyana, meditation. And if that experience of meditation continues undisturbed for a certain period of time, it will spontaneously lead into and result in the experience called samadhi. Right? So these three final limbs of Ashtanga Yoga, taken together, they're actually given one name, which is Samyama. Right? That process of the mind getting absorbed and absolutely one-pointed on a single experience, a single object, a single cognition. Right? So that's dharana, dhyana, samadhi. So 8 limbs from yama and niyama, the restraints, the ways that we can restrain our possible ways of manifesting our energy in our lives, in the world, to help us to direct our energy and our personality towards samadhi, towards meditation. Niyama, the observances, the specific ways that we can direct our energy. And then from asana up to samadhi, in some sense, they're separate practices. You can look at it like that. The practice of asana, you can practice so many different asanas, and they'll all have their own actually unique, beautiful benefits. They can all ultimately lead you into meditation themselves, but then the practice of asana, then all benefiting, sitting in your meditation asana, and going through the process of meditation. Pranayama, again, something that can be practiced as an individual practice, as a specific practice on its own, but also really an essential part of that process of meditation. And then from Pratyahara up to samadhi, just that natural flow, the one-pointed flow of the mind, turning inwards and then becoming one-pointed. So in a sense, from asana to samadhi, all of that is covered, all of that is practiced together when you sit down for meditation. When you sit down, align your spine, relax your body, try and get as sthira sukham, as still and comfortable as you can. Feel the flow of your breath. Direct your mind inwards and allow your mind to flow in one point. What you're doing is giving yourself asana all the way through the limbs and an attempt to experience samadhi in one practice. So in a sense, Ashtanga Yoga is really the practice of meditation itself. The Yamas and Niyamas are there to help you in your personality, in your life, in your relationships, to lead a life that will be conducive to meditation, that will, rather than creating obstacles in your mind, rather than creating emotional conflicts in your mind, will help your mind to be more and more joyful, balanced, and free of conflict, which will then allow your meditation to go deeper. Right, so I meant it to be a brief video for an introduction to Ashtanga Yoga. I think it's a bit longer than I'd planned, but that's still a relatively brief introduction to the system of practice called Ashtanga Yoga from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. I hope it was helpful, hope that there was something interesting or enlightening there, and wish you all beautiful, still, and peaceful meditations. Thank you very much, and see you next time.